Inevitably, one of the questions I get asked most about my record collection is, what's your most valuable album? I'll be honest, it's not something I like to put too much importance on because it kind of takes the focus away from the music, but it is something that people seem to always be interested in. So you got to give the people what they want. We will count down my most valuable records according to Discogs on this episode of Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, a small chain of independent shops in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you're not local, but you are in the U.S., you can shop online at ntxvinyl.com. Would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to our channel on YouTube and follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and even TikTok now. All right, my most valuable albums. This is, like I mentioned, a question I get a lot. I'm going to count down, according to Discogs, my most valuable albums based on their median value. And I did this video like over 2 years ago. So the most interesting thing to me was to look back at the old video and see which of these albums have maintained after 2.5 years and stayed on that list. Only a couple of them have, right? So that's very, very interesting. And I will talk to you about those. The other thing I'll say is value, obviously, in a lot of ways is in the eye of the beholder. Some things that are valuable to me may not be valuable to you. And there's an argument that says, you know, something's only worth what someone will pay for it. I kind of disagree with that. I think something's only worth what the right buyer in the right market will pay for it. Obviously, if I take a record and I try and sell it at a baseball card convention, I'm not going to get the true market value because I'm not in the right place and not at the right time, right? So got to keep that in mind. People balk at values of records a lot of times, but the reality is if you find the right buyer, the right collector who's after that specific item, then you may actually get top retail value based on what you see, not only on Discogs, but on sites like eBay, sites like PopSite, which track actual sales of records. And again, that's what this value is based on in Discogs, is what's actually sold on Discogs. So let's count them down. Again, I'm going to do my top 10. I'm going to start at number 10. This is definitely the oldest album on the list. This is my copy of the Stooges self-titled record. This is came out in 1969. This is an original pressing, and the median value of this record is $275. I will say I don't enter conditions on my records into Discogs. I just don't have that much time. Finding the right pressing takes a long enough time as is. This has a little bit of wear, so I don't know if this would be considered, you know, kind of medium or medium to high, depending on the fact that it's kind of a VG sleeve. But either way, beautiful record. An album that I honestly didn't get into until just recently, in the last couple years, a band I haven't gone to. I've always known the Stooges, but I've never really dove into their catalog. But I love this record. I love the garage rock era that the Stooges kind of spearheaded. And this is just a really cool album. I got this one on a dig and within a larger collection, which shocked the hell out of me to find this album, especially being you know, one of the original pressings of it. So again, 1969 copy of the Stooges self-titled album is valued at $275 on the median. So there you go. That's number 10 on the list. That was definitely not on the list 2.5 years ago because I didn't own it then. Next on the list, Nirvana, Incesticide. I love this record. This is the 1992 blue swirl. You can see it kind of there through the sleeve. The median value on this one is $277. A great record, a compilation album. This is one of those that the label pushed for because there was obviously so much momentum with Nevermind. They wanted something quickly Didn't want to have to wait for the band to record a new album. So this is B-sides and outtakes and covers. I love it a ton. I always have. I love those type of those compilation albums that just kind of pull all those extra tracks together. Because back in the day, you had to collect them one at a time on CD singles or 12-inch singles. So it's kind of nice that they're compiled. So I really love this record. I've had this for many, many years. Again, I didn't buy it in the 90s. I probably bought this in the early 2000s, I would bet. Love Incesticide. Great record by Nirvana. It was not on the list 2.5 years ago either. Next on the list, Above by Mad Season. This is a band and a record I talk about a lot. It's one of my favorite albums of all time, especially from the 90s era. This was on the list a couple years ago when I did this video. It was a much higher on the list though. Number 8 on the list this time. This is the 1995 original pressing. The median value is $300. There are reissues of this, a really nice reissue by Music on Vinyl that you can get for, I think, $40. So if you don't have this album, you don't have to chase down the original if you don't want to spend a couple $100. But for me, it doesn't get much better in regards to 90s alternative rock. Obviously a supergroup comprised of members of Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam and Screaming Trees. If you don't know this album and you're a fan of rock, alternative rock, grunge, whatever you want to call it, by all means, give this a shot. You will not be disappointed. So that's number 8 on the list, Mad Season. Like I said, it was much higher on the list a few years ago based on market fluctuation and based on just my collection, obviously. All right, number 7 on the list. This one was not there because I did not own this a couple years ago. I picked it up recently. This is Midnight Vultures by Beck, another one of my just favorite albums in my collection. Not necessarily just because of the value, but just because I've waited so long to own it. The median value on the 2000 pressing of Midnight Vultures is $310. This has never been reissued. That is the main reason, I think, in my opinion, that it is so sought after. It came out at a time, year 2000, where records were just not being produced all that much. Really cool that they still pressed it, but it's very hard to come by. This is the only copy I've ever seen, the one I'm holding in my hands. I've never even seen it other than this one, which I got off a local collector, which I was very appreciative of because it was very high on my want list. This is an album by Beck that is experimental and fun and just full of creativity, and that's why I love it. Go check out Nicotine and Gravy or Peaches and Cream or Deborah. There's just so many fantastic tracks on this album. So again, that's number 7. The median value, again, like I mentioned, $310 on Midnight Vultures. Next on the list, number 6 is the self-titled record by Alice in Chains, also known as Tripod. This is from 1995, an original pressing. The median value is $337. This was on the list a few years ago. I think it was a little higher up on the list. I've had this, I think, since kind of the late 90s. One of my favorite bands, from that era, goes without saying. And so this is a band that I collected all along, in the mid to late 90s into the 2000s. I was pretty much only buying my favorite artist on vinyl because I couldn't afford to buy much more than that. And so I'm glad I stayed the course though, because there are a lot of albums like this that just haven't gotten repressed that have really gone up in value because it's supply and demand. People are really after them. They want to complete their Alice in Chains catalog, and this is a key piece. Hopefully, knock on wood, that this will get a reissue soon. It would be fantastic if it did. I would be shocked if the band's not working on it already because there is so much demand for Alice in Chains on vinyl. And I know just even amongst my small circle of collectors and customers and friends that there is so much demand for this record. So Alice in Chains, self-titled, number 6 on the list, again at $337 median value. Next on the list, this one was on my list 2 years ago. In fact, it was number 1 on my list. Interesting. This is an original press in 1994 of Wildflowers by Tom Petty. The median value is $362. This was reissued finally in many different formats. I've got a 7 LP box set version of it, which is phenomenal. There's also a readily available 3 LP version, expanded version on this. Probably my favorite Tom Petty record, which is a hard choice. I'm glad I picked this one up. I did pick this one up back when it was released, in the mid-90s. I saw Tom and the band on this tour, which was incredible, in Dallas at the Starplex Amphitheater, as it used to be called. But it's interesting. This was number 1 on my list 3 years ago. I don't think the value has dropped all that much. I could compare and go back to that video and what I said, but I think I've just Other albums have gone up a little more. I've added a couple albums, which is why this is down at number 5 on my list now versus it was number 1 on my list, 2+ years ago. So love this record. I've got several different versions of it, but I'll always cherish this original one because of when I got it back when it was released. All right, next on the list, number 4 is the first representation of Pearl Jam, if you don't count Mad Season, at $373, and that is Rear View Mirror. This is the original press from 2004. It is a 4 LP. This is actually a sealed copy, one of very few sealed copies in my collection. I plan to open this, and then they've reissued it just recently. So they did a reissue of Rear View Mirror. It's not the 4 LP version. They split it up into two LPs, which initially were a Walmart or a Target exclusive, and now readily available. So it was interesting to see that this really has not gone down much in value at all. $373 median value. And that's one of the misnomers I think about value. I see it all the time. People will say, oh, I see the reissues coming out. I guess my original pressing is going to tank. I should sell it now before it happens. That's really not how this works. Like, original pressings maintain their value because there are always collectors like myself who appreciate that original copy because of the nostalgia that goes around it, and because the fact that it was most likely sourced from the best possible masters at that time. So sound quality wise, as well as artwork and everything that goes into it. When 20, 30 years pass and an album gets reissued, there's a lot of things that can change with the sound, the artwork, the quality, and all those types of things. So original pressings, in my opinion, and from what I see, for the most part, really hold their value regardless if something gets reissued. So don't worry about, valuable records going down just because something gets reissued. There may be a short-term lull in demand if the reissue is readily available, but again, original pressings are always going to maintain their value to a certain extent, especially on collectible artists like a Pearl Jam or something like that. All right, number 3 on the list, right behind Pearl Jam, you have got Nevermind. This is a 91 club pressing. Median value is $411. This is kind of a VG jacket, so it wouldn't sell for that. If I wanted to sell it, maybe it would sell for $300-400. I'm not sure, but I'm not selling any of these anyway, so it doesn't matter. But obviously, iconic record. Not even my favorite Nirvana record. I would put In Utero, honestly, as my favorite before Nevermind. And I talked about Incesticide earlier, but it's cool to see a couple representations of Nirvana on here. They weren't on there at all a couple years ago when I shot it. But this is a really sought after album, especially the early versions. There's a Mobile Fidelity version that is super high priced. I think it goes for, twice or 3 times what the original pressings go for, just because it's got a sound quality that supposedly is superior. There are a ton of different pressings of this album. And there's a lot of intricacies involved in figuring out which one sounds best. There's shootout videos, as they're called. You can look them up, where people have compared 10 different pressings of Nevermind to figure out sonically which one sounds best. This one sounds pretty good to my ears on my system. It's got a little crackle to it because, again, it's not a mint copy, but I still enjoy it, and I've had it for probably a year or two. Again, I don't think I owned it when I shot that initial video. So that's Nevermind, number 3 on the list, again at $411. Next up, number 2, we're getting close to the end, and this is another Pearl Jam record. This was on the list a few years ago, pretty high up on the list too. The median value is $500 on Pearl Jam's B-side compilation, Lost Dogs from 2003. This is a 3 LP. Like I mentioned, tons of B-sides, outtakes, and kind of soundtrack songs. Anything that wasn't on the main albums is included here. You've got stuff like Alone, which was a 10 B-side. You've got songs like Yellow Ledbetter, which were left over from 10. Hold On was a 10 outtake. Hard to Imagine. Footsteps. The song Last Kiss, which was the band's biggest radio single ever, was as a cover song. So again, just a really cool set. Remains to be seen if the band and label will ever reissue this, One would think since they reissued Rear View Mirror that maybe this one is coming as a reissue, but you never really know. Hopefully it sees the light of day, because it would be a great album for other Pearl Jam collectors to own without dropping, you know, many hundreds of dollars if you can even find a copy. Pretty rare album to find. And again, came out in 2003, the dark days of vinyl when CD was king, so there just wasn't a lot of these to go around. I distinctly remember I got this from 10 Club, which back then is pretty much how I got all my Pearl Jam records, because they were still pressing them all throughout that time. So again, that's number 2, Lost Dogs by Pearl Jam, medium value of $500. And last but not least, definitely a new addition to my collection, is my 1996 original pressing of, or I guess it's technically a reissue, but it came out a little later in 96, of Enema by Tool. The median value is $630 on this record. I owe a friend for trading me for this record. I will always be indebted to him for that. Just a phenomenal, iconic record for me. 1996, like right in the thick of things as far as my youth, really starting to cut my teeth on bands, and Enema was a record that I had on repeat endlessly in my car, specifically in the CD. Saw the band at least 5 or 6 times on this tour specifically. They toured for 2-3 years on this tour. Saw them in smaller venues, saw them at large Lollapalooza, you know, a few years after release. So just kind of the heyday of Tool when they weren't really in the shadows, kind of the last tour where you could actually see Maynard up front and they weren't kind of all shrouded in darkness, and they were playing outdoor arenas in the middle of the day during Lollapalooza. It was kind of crazy. So I love this record. It's definitely worth, you know, whatever it is, $600 to me. And it's never been reissued after those original pressings. So there's tons of bootlegs and unofficial copies, because the band, for whatever reason, has never reissued this album. Whenever that day comes, it will be chaos, because there are so many people, you know, speaking about pent-up demand for Alice in Chains, talk about pent-up demands for Tool. Not only Enema, but also 10,000 Days do not exist in official pressings. So there's my list in the top 10, counting down from the Stooges all the way to Tool's Enema. Like I mentioned, really don't talk about value too much in regards to records, because I think it just kind of devalues the idea behind a record and the experience, which should all be tied back to the music. That's just my personal feeling. But again, people love to look at values. They love to see eye candy, and so hopefully I provided a little bit here for you. It's interesting to look back again after a couple years and see what's changed. This will probably be a video I do on a yearly basis, just so I can kind of track those fluctuations of these high-end albums, which is certainly fun to do. So thanks again for watching another episode of Talking About Records. I will pop up some additional videos. Stick around on the channel. Really appreciate all the support, and we'll see you again